Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this webinar on APVAR 2.0, the new varroamide treatment registered in the USA and how you can integrate it into your IPM strategy. So my name is Joanna. I'm the marketing manager at Veto Pharma, connecting from France. And while we give everyone a couple of minutes to connect, let me quickly go over a few Zoom tips. So if you have any question during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section and we will address them at the end of the presentation. If you're having trouble to hear us or see the slide, please let us know in the chat. And actually, if you could let us know right now if you can hear me well and see the screen, that would be great. All right, so now I'm excited to introduce our speaker, Ulrike Marski, connecting from Germany. Ulrike is the Veto Pharma International Technical Manager. She's been with us since 2017, and she's our go-to person for all the technical questions about our products and also leading our field trials. She holds a PhD in biology, and she has worked in the field of varroamide management for 11 years now. So Ulrike, I will hand things over to you. And yeah, I hope you all enjoy this webinar and see you later.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Joanna, and hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So as Joanna already mentioned in her introduction, we are here today to introduce you to Apivar 2.0, our recently registered new miticide. And we also want to talk a little bit about how to integrate Apivar 2.0 in your integrated Varroa management strategy. So, first of all, of course, the first question is what's new about Apivar 2.0, especially compared with the original Apivar strips? First of all, we have a slightly different formulation, a new formulation with Apivar 2.0. We have added an adjustable new hanging system to the strips for easier application in different hive types, or as I should say, different frame sizes. The treatment period has also been extended a little bit. So for Apivar, we had the 6 to 8 weeks treatment, and now with Apivar 2.0, we have the option of treating between 6 and 10 weeks. And then one of our main objectives when developing Apivar 2.0 was to develop a product that would act faster against varroa mites, especially at the beginning of the treatment after application. And this is exactly what we managed to do with this product. So I will tell you a little bit more about that as well. Another difference compared with Apivar is that beekeepers do not have a withholding period after the treatment anymore. So instead of waiting for 14 days, beekeepers can now immediately set up their honey supers right after they remove the strips from their hives. So let's take a closer look at the formulation, and let me just move this a little bit. So in Apivar, we have a concentration of 3.33% amitraz per strip, whereas in Apivar 2.0, the concentration is 3%, slightly lower. But really, the only reason for that is that Apivar 2.0 strips are longer. So there is slightly more material to the strip. And that's why with the same amount of amitraz per strip, you have a slightly lower concentration of amitraz. In Apivar, we have one inactive ingredient, which is the plastic powder, whereas in Apivar 2.0, we actually have a total of 3 inactive ingredients. The first one is plastic powder, just like in Apivar. And then we have added a release enhancer just to increase amitraz release from the strips. And this is, of course, connected to our objective to have faster action at the beginning of the treatment period. And then we have also added a moisture scavenger to, on the other hand, still maintain the stability of the Apivar 2.0 strips. The main objective of Apivar has always been to have a long-term treatment that ensures long-term release of amitraz from the strip in contact with the bees. In Apivar 2.0, we also have the objective to have a long-term treatment. But as mentioned before, on top of that, we also want to have a little bit of a knockdown effect almost, or a faster action at the beginning of the treatment. Both strips are basically chemical blends between amitraz and the plastic powder. The only difference here is that you have 3 active ingredients in Apivar 2.0 and only 1 in Apivar. So I hope that on this picture on the left, you can already see the hanging system a little bit, but I will also show it on the next slide. So we have added this hanging system that makes it much easier to fix the Apivar 2.0 strips in between 2 frames. The Apivar 2.0 strips are 11.8 inches long, or 30 centimeters long, and they are actually adjustable in length depending on the hive type or frame size. There is also a pre-cut folding line on the strips that works nicely for Langstroth hives. So beekeepers can fold the strips where the line is and just fold the strips over the frames in the brood area in the center of the brood nest to apply the strips. Okay, so here we have the adjustable hanging system shown in the illustration on the right. We can see that there are different application methods depending on the frame size or hive type. And also, as illustrated here on the lower right, just like with Apivar, we strongly recommend that beekeepers apply the strips in the center of the brood nest. So maybe you can see this encircled on the lower right, where you see that the strips should be applied in the center. And on the left side, you see on the picture how the strip can be folded over a Langstroth frame. So this is just an exemplary photo to illustrate how the strips can be applied with the new hanging system. So that makes it really easy, and no other tools or any sort of other equipment is needed to fix the strips in the hive. The new treatment duration is 6 to 10 weeks. And what we recommend is that beekeepers can treat for 6 weeks when there is little brood in the colony. So for example, in early spring or as a late fall treatment. We do recommend the full 10 weeks for best efficacy results. So we absolutely recommend to extend to the maximum treatment duration, for example, for an end of summer treatment when there is still a lot of brood present in the colonies. Because if there is a lot of brood in the colonies, you just need to cover more mite reproductive cycles in order to really obtain full efficacy. And we would also like to remind beekeepers that for maximum efficacy, ideally they should adjust the position of the strips mid-treatment, and if possible, also clean them of wax or propolis if necessary. So as mentioned before, we did develop this product to have a faster mite knockdown at the beginning of the treatment. And the reason for that is that we have received feedback for the Apivar strips from beekeepers that sometimes, especially at the end of summer, when there are a lot of mites in the colonies and the mite population is just very high, they need something that works faster, and not necessarily something that just stretches out over several weeks and has sort of a continuous mite drop effect. So these are data from a 2023 efficacy trial comparing Apivar with Apivar 2.0. This was a 10 weeks treatment, and the application was at the end of August. So you can see the results for Apivar 2.0 here in orange, and the results for Apivar in white. And as you can see, if you look at the cumulated efficacy after 70 days, which would be 10 weeks, there is not really a big difference, a significant difference there in the final efficacy, but Apivar 2.0 is just a lot faster in the way it acts in the beginning of the treatment. So if we look specifically here after 14 days, we can see that after 14 days, Apivar 2.0 has already achieved 60% of its efficacy here, whereas Apivar is just at maybe 27% or something like that. So that's what makes up the difference between these two products. And we hope that this will help beekeepers, especially for a treatment in summer. As mentioned before, there is no withholding period after the treatment. So beekeepers can add the honey supers immediately after removal of the strips. And this is basically just to give you some additional information. Of course, we also had to do some honey residue analysis with our new product, Apivar 2.0. And we conducted a few trials. In this trial, we looked at honey from the supers. So just let me emphasize at the beginning that this is something that beekeepers, of course, should never do. They should never have supers present on their hives when they treat with Apivar or Apivar 2.0. But in this case, we did it just to look at the amount of residue that would come out of this. So we have 3 different groups here. The first group on the left was treated with Apivar for 10 weeks. Then in the center, we have a group of colonies treated with Apivar 2.0 for 5 weeks. And on the right side, Apivar 2.0 for 10 weeks. And the color code, what the color code means is all the samples that you see in orange were basically, so they were tested for amitraz and amitraz metabolite residues. And all the samples in orange were below the lower limit of quantification. So for this method, this was 40.98 microgram per kilogram. So in all of the orange samples tested, we could not detect amitraz or any of the metabolites. The samples shown here in blue, especially visible in the second group, Apivar 2.0 for 5 weeks, could be quantified. But so they were above the lower level of quantification, but still below the maximum residue limit in all cases. So the maximum residue limit is 200 microgram amitraz and metabolites per kilogram honey. And you may ask yourself, looking at this chart, why there were quantifiable samples where we found some low-level residues in the center group that was treated with Apivar 2.0 for 5 weeks. And we believe that the reason is that this group was actually treated later. The strips were inserted later compared to the other groups that were treated for 10 weeks, so that all the groups would end at the same time. The trial would end at about the same time. So basically, the strips were added later and were sort of more fresh in these colonies. Apivar 2.0 is just like Apivar, well tolerated by bees. We found no significant effects on the development of the bee population and no significant effect on the number of bee brood cells. So looking at the evolution of the bee population in a 2021 trial here tested for 10 weeks, we see that the mean number of bees was estimated before the application, 7 days before the application of the strips, and there was no significant difference between the Apivar group and the Apivar 2.0 group. And we have the same picture after 31 days after the application. There is no significant difference between the two groups in terms of bee population, and the same towards the end of the trial. Now, you may notice that the bee population throughout the trial is going down quite a bit. And the reason for that is simply that the application date here was in September and the strips were removed at the beginning of November. So you would absolutely expect the bee population to decrease during that time of the season. And that's what happened here in both groups. Looking at the evolution of brood cells, we have a very similar pattern. There was no significant difference before application between the two groups, between the colonies. The same was true after 31 days after the application. And then you can see at the end of the treatment, there is almost no brood left because it's November. So that's the reason. Some information about the Apivar 2.0 packaging and availability. Apivar 2.0 comes in different pack sizes, in 4 packs, 12 packs, and 60 packs. And this is, of course, to accommodate different types of beekeeping operation and to have packages available for hobbyists and sideliners and commercial beekeepers. So far, Apivar 2.0 has received a federal registration, of course, and is registered in almost all states now, except for California and Connecticut, where it's still pending. Apivar 2.0 will be available through the main beekeeping material suppliers in the US, so just like Apivar, and it will be available this summer. As a matter of fact, I believe that it is being shipped right now as we speak. So how can you implement Apivar 2.0 in your IPM strategy for Varroa management? First of all, I think that managing Varroa mites more than anything else, and a lot of people underestimate this, means to know where your colonies stand and to act on it. So that means counting mites. And we just recommend to pick your preferred monitoring method, whatever it may be, whether you like alcohol washes or you have some other kind of method. Maybe you look at the bottom boards or you have a completely different method. Maybe you open the brood. And just to get an idea of what your infestation level is in your colonies, and to use that information in order to time your Varroa control strategy. So just a small illustration here of why monitoring Varroa mites is so important. We see a graph on the left side here that shows great variability in mite infestation from one year to the next. So we have the years 2010, 11, 13, and 14 here. This is the same apiary, and this is the same time of the year, the same time of the season. And in green, we have all the colonies in this apiary that are under threshold, that in theory are fine and would not necessarily have to be treated immediately. In yellow, we have the colonies that are within the treatment threshold, and in red, all the colonies that are above threshold and need to be treated immediately. So you can see that there is a big difference around the same time of year in summer. These are data from France. And you can see how different the situation can be just from one year to the next. And the same is true can be true within the same apiary, where if you look here at different hives and the difference in Varroa infestation level. So it's always worthwhile to know and to learn your Varroa mite infestation levels. We also recommend strongly to respect treatment instructions when applying Varroa treatments, because treatment instructions for use of Varroa treatments have been defined for a reason. They are not just random statements that you read on a piece of paper. And they are really the only way to use the treatment in an authorized manner. They determine how to handle the treatment, what kind of safety equipment you may need, where to apply the treatment in the hive. And there can be confusion about this. Don't underestimate this. And then also the dosage, very important to apply the correct dosage, not underdose and not overdose. To leave the treatment in the hive for the correct treatment duration, and also to check for any potential external conditions that must be met, such as ambient temperature, presence of brood in the colonies, is ventilation necessary for this treatment or not? Is it only applicable in certain hive types, and all of that. Another very important point that is especially important for me to share is that beekeepers need to rotate active ingredients. By rotating active ingredients or miticides, beekeepers help to preserve the efficacy of Varroa treatments. And in the case of Amitraz resistance, there are actually some strong indications that rotation can even contribute to restore Varroa mite sensitivity towards Amitraz after treatments with other miticides. So that's a very important point, that rotation is really important to preserve the efficacy of miticides. We recommend to make treatment rotation a habit, also just by selecting the most suitable treatment depending on your colony's needs and depending on your situation. And ask yourself questions such as, what time of the season is it right now? What are the outside temperatures? How high is my Varroa infestation level? And what time window do I have available for the treatment? For example, is there a honey flow upcoming? Is there something else that I want to do with my colonies? And that's why maybe I don't have 10 weeks, I have less. Or do I have the time? I mean, these are all questions that beekeepers need to ask themselves. So in order to include Apivar 2.0 in your integrated Varroa control strategy, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, it's very important to monitor your Varroa mite levels. We recommend to only apply the Apivar 2.0 strips after reading the instructions carefully. We recommend to apply Apivar 2.0 in the hives either in spring or in fall when Varroa mite infestations have reached treatment threshold. As mentioned before, beekeepers now have a little bit more flexibility with this treatment. First of all, because there is no withholding period, but also because of the change in treatment duration, 6 to 10 weeks. We do not recommend to use Apivar 2.0 more than twice a year. And we strongly encourage beekeepers to rotate active ingredients and Varroa treatments throughout the year, so from one treatment to the next. In the last part of my presentation, I would just like to review some frequently asked questions. The first one is obvious. What is the added value of Apivar 2.0 compared to the original Apivar? And our answer would be that Apivar 2.0 has been specifically formulated to act more quickly in the colony, achieving a more rapid mite level reduction in the first few weeks. We've also improved the hanging system of the strips to fit different frames. And we have, so the withholding period has been removed and the treatment period has been changed from 6 to 10 weeks. So that adds some flexibility. And these are really the core differences between Apivar 2.0 and Apivar. We also sometimes receive the question about the texture of the strips, because in the photos, they look a little bit like they have a cardboard-like texture. So is it a paper impregnated strip? The answer is no. It's an extruded plastic strip, just like Apivar. So it's a chemical blend between the other ingredients and the plastic powder. It just looks different because of the other two ingredients that have been added. What is the shelf life of an unopened pack of Apivar 2.0? The answer is 24 months, just like for Apivar. And of course, to ensure best treatment results, again, we recommend to store the strips in unopened packs, of course, and in cool, dry places protected from the sunlight. How can beekeepers dispose of Apivar 2.0 after using the strips? The answer is the EPA label recommends to wrap used strips in newspaper and place it in the trash. The most important thing is to avoid contaminating water sources. And for specific disposal guidelines on the state level, of course, you can consult local waste management authorities or pesticide disposal regulations. So maybe the most important question here is, why did you develop an amitraz-based miticide in times of amitraz resistance reports? And the answer here is that we believe that amitraz is still a very important cornerstone and an effective tool in reducing varroa mite infestations and managing varroa mites. First of all, it's very gentle action on the bees, and independence of ambient temperature is a big plus, a big advantage. That also makes it more flexible for beekeepers to use. It's very user-friendly, well tolerated by the bee colony. And we think that by rotating it actively and by rotating it with other active ingredients throughout the year, that it can still be a very effective and helpful part of the varroa management strategy of beekeepers. So that's also why we strongly recommend rotation in between different varroa treatments throughout the season. So that's all. Thank you.
And I'm back. So we have a few questions in the chat. So one from Clay and Benji asked the same. How do you clean the strips at mid-treatment?
So you can use your hive tool for that. So actually you can, first of all, you should take a look at the strips because it's not always necessary. It depends a little bit on the colony, or on the bees, I should say. And well, if you find that there is a lot of wax and or propolis on the strips, you can use your hive tool to scratch that off. As I said, there may not be anything or much on the strips at all. It really is individual and depends on the bees and the colonies.
Then a question from Lisa. Was there any reporting of hive absconding when the strips were first placed in the hive?
Not that I'm aware of. So for the Apivar 2.0 strips, I am not aware that we have any problems with absconding. I mean, of course, beekeepers, especially in spring, need to make sure that they offer enough space to their colonies. But that's, I think, completely independent of the Varroa treatment application. And then maybe, if you have added space and there's a honey flow ongoing, is also not necessarily the time when you want to treat with Apivar or Apivar 2.0. But no, just because of the application, we have not observed anything like that.
Okay. Question from Devan. What does the plastic powder do?
Oh, I mean, the plastic powder basically gives the strip structure. It's a structure that allows the release of amitraz when bees come in contact with the strip. So that's really the only function. It's basically there to have a physical item from which the amitraz molecules are released. That's the purpose.
JC is asking, what are the temperature restrictions for use?
There are no temperature restrictions. I mean, we don't necessarily recommend to open up the hive in the middle of winter when it's freezing and you have a winter cluster, and to ram the strips into the winter cluster. So that's not recommended. But other than that, there is no maximum temperature recommendation or anything like that. And I would say that as soon as the bees are active and you do not have honey supers on, you can treat with Apivar 2.0.
I have two similar questions from Corina and Lynn. Have you seen mite resistance to Apivar 2.0? And with amitraz resistance showing up in Varroa Destructor, how is 2.0 going to be any better than the original Apivar?
Well, so first of all, we did not really have the chance of observing amitraz resistance in a treatment with Apivar 2.0. Simply because it has not been sold yet. It's not out in the market yet. And of course, it's possible that beekeepers who have mite populations that might be resistant towards amitraz or show some level of resistance towards amitraz will buy the product and will treat with the product. So that's definitely a possibility. And I think the only way to really ensure that that's not happening is either to really consciously rotate and also use different active ingredients before Apivar 2.0 is ever applied to these hives, and also to maybe do resistance testing and reach out to your local beekeeping inspector and maybe ask them if this is something that they can advise you on, and check if your mite populations are resistant against amitraz or not. The second question, how is it going to be any better? I think it's going to act faster on those mite populations that are sensitive towards amitraz. That would be my answer.
Eduardo is asking, what is the maximum infestation level at which Apivar 2.0 is still an effective treatment, bringing the infestation rates down to below 0.5%? That is specific.
What was the last part? I'm sorry.
Bringing the infestation rates down to below 0.5%.
So I cannot answer that question, to be fair, because first of all, the treatment thresholds are local, they are regional. So they can differ a lot between one region and the next, between one country and the next. And I know that nowadays recommended treatment threshold especially in the United States, are quite low, depending on the time of the season, at 2%, sometimes 1%, as I said, depending on the time of the season. But I cannot really give you a number of this is the maximum threshold. I think beekeepers should just know their local treatment thresholds or try to gather information about this. Maybe from beekeeping inspectors, maybe from other beekeepers, maybe from their local beekeeping club or association. So it's important to have an idea about what your local threshold is, but we have not really tested Apiver 2.0 in terms of in this region, when you have this level of mite infestation, it takes you this long to reduce it to 0.5. So we just haven't done those kinds of experiments, and I think it would be very difficult to realize that all over global regions.
Two similar questions from Clay and Javier. Does the active ingredient get into the wax, and how long does the residual chemical into the honey lasts?
Okay, so amitraz itself usually does not accumulate in the wax. It's the metabolites that accumulate in the wax, and one of them is more persistent than the other. But over time, the metabolites also degrade in wax. So in terms of the level of metabolites that accumulate there, we do recommend in general, completely independent on what the different residues are in wax from all kinds of treatments, from any pesticides that might be acquired from the environment. We do recommend that beekeepers renew their wax combs every 3 years, every 3 years if possible. Some recommendations over here in Europe say you can also renew the wax combs 1/3 every year. So that basically is the same recommendation. I would say it is a matter of weeks until the level of metabolites in the wax, the residue level, significantly decreases. But in terms of accumulation in honey, I think it's actually even faster than that. But of course, we do not recommend beekeepers to harvest honey and to go for honey collection while they are doing the treatment, simply because we want to avoid any sort of amitraz and metabolite residues in honey that is considered for human consumption. So it's not really an issue in terms of residues in honey for human consumption. Yeah, but definitely beekeepers have to also follow a certain procedure of wax hygiene and just renew their combs regularly.
So a different question from Clay and Jim related to the open package. Can you store an open package, and is the packaging made to be stored if it's already open? Same question.
We do not really recommend that. We recommend to keep the packages closed until you really want to open them to apply the treatment. And we do have different packaging sizes, which helps beekeepers to pick sort of the suitable package size depending on their number of colonies that they have. So we really do not encourage to keep open packages and have them somewhere stored in a shelf for months or anything like that, because we just cannot guarantee the stability of those strips.
A question from Mike. Has the level of mite resistance to original APVAR ever actually been quantified versus just claimed 25% or 0.1%?
So I think we have to talk about the fact that it's not really a level of resistance towards Apivar, or it's not really resistance towards Apivar or Apivar 2.0. It's resistance towards Amitraz.
Well,
So
I mean,
it's resistance. Yeah. No. I'm just elaborating. And so if the level of resistance can be very different, again, locally, depending on where you look, and even from one operation to the next, and within beekeeping operations, even from one colony to the next. So there is not really a fixed level of resistance that we can talk about, because it depends a lot on the management practices of the beekeeping operation. It depends on many different factors. For example, has the beekeeper acquired some bee packages? Where are they from? What were the management practices in that operation? Or, what type of beekeeper is it? What are they treating with usually throughout the year? All of this plays a big role. And so the answer is we cannot really speak of one level of resistance globally or even on the US level against Amitraz. It's very locally variable.
A question from Nathan. So this is a bit related to the question on plastic previously. Has any testing been done to show any traces of microplastics from the strip material, which might be showing up in the hive wax or even honey later on?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah,
I am not aware of any studies. I think these types of studies are also not required, I would say, for the authorization process. So no, I don't think that any studies like that have been done.
yeah, what we know is that the plastic powder is blended, so it's melted
Yeah.
as a strip, and there is no degradation of the strips, so that minimizes the risk. Have there been studies to determine if any particular mite treatments are more effective than others when used in rotation with APVAR or APVAR 2.0?
I don't necessarily know of a comparison, but I have seen data where colonies that showed a certain level of resistance, or the mite populations were resistant against Amitraz, have been treated with oxalic acid afterwards. And then those mite populations did regain some sensitivity against Amitraz, or actually full sensitivity against Amitraz, I would say, looking at the results of the following year. So I have mainly heard this in connection with oxalic acid. I cannot really speak to any comparison with any of the other actives, but I can also think of no reason why it would work less well with other actives.
And I have a last one. This is not a question, this is more a comment from Eduardo Gomez. The reality of the apiary is often this: Hive A has a 1% infestation, Hive B has a 3% infestation, Hive C has a 7% infestation, and so on. Infestation levels are rarely uniform. Manufacturers should be able to specify the maximum infestation level at which their product can still be used effectively, just my opinion.
Okay, thank you for that comment. We will take that into consideration. Yeah, I think there's also maybe a little bit of of a difference in perspective here, because I think these mite levels that are often determined in alcohol washes in the United States are a very common tool to determine mite infestation for beekeepers. But for our trials, when we develop new products and when we look at the authorization of a new product, we often do what I would see as a more intensive, a more detailed approach because we look at the mite fall on the bottom boards. So we basically over weeks look at how many mites are falling when you apply this treatment or this new treatment, and what percentage of mites is killed, how quickly over time. So it's a little bit of a different perspective. The focus in Europe is not so much on the mite levels determined in alcohol washes for these sort of registration efficacy trials.
And that's it. I think we covered all the questions. So thank you.
Okay,
Thanks a lot, Ulrike.
thanks a lot. Yeah, if you can think of any other questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. Now I think I closed the presentation, so we don't have the contact slide open, but maybe we can post our address in the chat.
Yeah, you can contact us at info@vetopharma.com and write us on the website as well. We're available
Mhm.
on social media. And feel free to subscribe to the newsletter because we often share information on it, technical articles, the webinar announcements, and when the product will be available with the list of retailers, we will send it as well on the newsletter. So you can go to our website, you have the newsletter button at the top, and you can subscribe. So thank you, everyone, and
Thank you.
day and a great weekend.